Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, everyone. So we're back as we head into the International Snooze Fest, the third one of the campaign thus far. Probably the one where we're all kind of like, oh, you know what? I'd rather do without this because I kind of want to kind of keep this momentum up now. Well, Game Week 13 is a mere speck on the horizon, and it was a bit of a rollercoaster game week where Saturday despair was countered by Sunday bliss, at least for me and many of the others of you out there. With that more zoomed out pod with Game Week 13 a little bit away, I'm Tom. I'm here with a beer. I'm still coughing, which is really, really bloody annoying. So if there are any kind of breaks in the audio, that's just me coughing, and I'll be back in a second. You haven't lost connection or anything. That's just having a baby for you, I'm afraid, and not being able to sleep to kind of just get over it. But hey, there we go. Joined by Sam as always. You're right, mate.
Yeah, all good, thanks. Yeah, don't worry. I'll try my very best to cover off any coughing with some sort of ramblings on my side if I can. Yeah, as you mentioned, Game Week 12 was very interesting. I think we were all a little bit worried after Saturday that it would be another sort of extended nightmare from Game Week 11. And I happened to have a ski lesson at exactly the wrong time, halfway between the 2 p.m. So I missed the second half of all the 2 p.m.s and then most of the Chelsea Man City game. So by the time I came out of it, that had all completely disappeared and we all had much, much better scores generally across the board. So yeah, I think we're both fairly happy with how things went, but we'll check out our teams in just a moment. As always, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we'll be having a look back over the last 12 weeks of underlying data for teams. And we'll have a look at some of the key men from each of those teams as well. But what we've got prepared for you today is more of a generalistic look across all 20 teams, how they're performing on the most important underlying data key points, and we've got it prepared for you on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll have the graph up in front of us, or the spreadsheet up in front of us rather, and then we'll be looking at the next 5 weeks. More next week we'll be looking at that, but we'll have a look at that a little bit this week and having a bit of a look as we fast forward with several game weeks to come in quite a congested period over the busy winter schedule. As always, we'll finish off with a listener Q&A. We won't be doing bold claims this week. We usually do that in the second week of the international break, once Tom and I have had a good think about how we can get that wrong again for the following week. This is the 13th of November on the Monday. All the games are done. The international break is just beginning, but hopefully before you all switch off, you'll enjoy this show, and I'll leave it over to Tom to kick us off.
Perfect. Should we do scores on the doors then, Sam? And
Let's do it.
I cannot fathom for the life of me how I've managed to beat you on gross score. I had 3 from 4 on Saturday. The main reason for this, the transfers that I made, well, I got Son for Maddison in the end. So I did say last week I was playing on Saka. There was a lot of uncertainty about Saka. Mikel doing his usual kind of Jamaican bait and switch. No idea whether he was going to play. And I kind of felt, you know what, I've got Martinelli. He's fit. He's going to kind of start. Happy with that. And I'd spoken a couple of weeks ago about not really being too happy about the Son removal. So my feeling was, you know what, this is a good opportunity to get a player in that I think I'm just going to want to own for the time being until he swans off to the Asian Cup. Have him in, correct that mistake, don't fall prey to kind of sunk cost. And I had the money to do that from last week doing Trippier to Shimikas. So I did that. And then on the other side of it, I was just like, okay, well, maybe I'll get an Arsenal defender in then. And last week I mooted Ben White and I had perfect money to bring Ben White in for Pedro Porro, which I did do. Obviously, there was no indication whatsoever from Arteta that he was carrying an injury or something. Didn't have enough. I think the official kind of line was that he kind of hadn't quite recovered from the Champions League game. But yeah, a bit of a shock that really, because I kind of saw that as being a nailed-on clean sheet. Obviously, it didn't quite transpire that way. Ben White obviously went to my bench, and Kabore came in against Man United. And of course, to compound it all, Porro got the attacking return that I've been waiting for a long time. got that assist for the Brennan Johnson goal. So yeah, that's a very, very kind of annoying little Saturday going on. 3 from 4, awful stuff. And watching you, Sam, with the Saliba goal, whereas I'd been sat on Saliba in for Shimikas the day before. That I was thinking that could be a move I could do because I paid money for that. I think it was on the Thursday night. I thought, no, I'll leave it because I want to hear the press conferences, and so I kind of was priced out of that one. And of course, I'm very glad that I was, because Shimikas pretty much saved my game with the 2 assists. One of the assists, I mean, that's one which is that could easily have been out of play. Frankly, I think it was the first one, wasn't it? Whereas another situation, like, look up, the ball is round, so hopefully that means that it's in, right? But yeah, 15 points from Shimikas is absolutely massive. Just a really good sort of few minutes, really. I had the in-laws over, so I had a roast dinner. Kind of glanced down at my phone a little while later, and kind of on my Slack it was like, oh, Salah goal, Shimikas assist, and Bones just scored as well. It's like, oh my god. So all my Christmases came at once, really. It just took me up to 88 minus 4, so 84 net. So my rank went up from 600k ish to 427k, which is quite nice kind of to go into the national break on a green arrow, especially after you've kind of pulled it back from the jaws of defeat. One of those where, like, it's great to just score, like, much like Wolves did, 2 late winners effectively to carry yourself over the line. The only kind of regret, I suppose, is that Haaland matched Salah, because Haaland was over 100% in both of our teams, and if he didn't get that kind of very, 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 very marginal assist for the Rodri goal, I mean, when I saw it happen, I was like, yeah, that's a Haaland assist. They're going to give that, because it kind of just glanced off his leg, doesn't it? And it's just like, oh, okay, they're going to give that. But if he hadn't got that, I think maybe my rank would have been a tiny bit better. But hey, that's just the nature of the beast, really, in owning the 2 sort of behemoths of the game right now. So yeah, that's me, and you weren't too far behind at all.
No, not at all. So I matched you in terms of net score on 84. Obviously, I didn't take a hit. I did make 2 transfers to fix what was a very broken defence previous to this game week. So Udogie and Burn, I had the exact money to move both of them out for Saliba and Lascelles. So I had to bring in Lascelles in order to afford Saliba. So I was fairly content with even the 0-pointer from Lascelles, knowing that Saliba came on and got me the goal. So at that point, always rosy in the world. And I went into Sunday on it. I think it was 18 from 5, which on the whole of it is not great. But compared to what a lot of managers had after the Saturday fixtures, was much better than the average. So I was being quite quiet across Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, because I didn't want to sort of get ahead of myself. And then obviously Sunday happened. It was a great day, I think, for anyone who had Salah, Haaland captain, Bowen owners, Saka obviously did it on the Saturday, Watkins as well. All of that went really well for me. And as I mentioned, I didn't see any of that live. I got it on notifications on Live Score when I came out of my ski lesson. And I noticed that Liverpool had kept the clean sheet. So I was a little bit like, I don't know what Tsimikas has done here. Obviously bagged 2 assists. Very annoying that he stuck second on my bench. But knowing how it looked going in, I was more than happy having him benched, because 1, I didn't know he was going to start. We didn't know about Gomez's injury. And he played an absolute shocker in midweek that made me think he would be benched anyway. Yeah. So I don't think I would have changed my decision going in. If I'd known he was nailed in to start and Gomez was injured, I probably would have started him over Lascelles, which obviously would have been a lovely 15-point gain. But realistically speaking, I didn't know about that. So I'm not going to cry about the outcome. I'm more than happy with 84 points. It's a nice green arrow. A lot of my players returned. I think there's 7 goals across my starting 11, which is very nice going into an international break. Game week rank of 800k, and I'm up into, I think, 600-ish K now. I think it's 618k. Yeah. So happy with a nice green arrow going into game week 13 and the international break. And yeah, I'm not really sure where I'm going next at this point. So we'll discuss transfers later on. But yeah, I'm pretty content with that as a score overall. And it's a nice feeling to have after a horror show last game week.
Yeah, we both had sort of that if and but, didn't we? Like Ben White, Shimikas, there's always kind of a little bit of information which we didn't have, which you can't then hindsight. I mean, yes, it's frustrating for me making the transfer, for you benching the player, but on what we knew before the deadline, both decisions were absolutely sound, I think. So yeah, as you said, you can't really beat yourself up too much about that. And I think 15 points for Shimikas was really out of this world, really, in terms of variance. You'd be expecting Brentford to score. You really wouldn't be expecting him to get 2 assists, like maybe 1, something like that. But yeah, 2 is just crazy stuff. But yeah, obviously I'm not going to complain. Cool. All right. As Sam mentioned, contemplate and bold claims will return next week. But this week we are kind of doing one of our zoomed out pods just because we're at the start of the international break and we've got no football to look forward to next weekend in the Premier League. So one zoomed out this week, one zoomed in next week, a review of sorts, as Sam said this week, and a preview more sort of thing next week. And how we're going to do this is a bit of sort of looking through the teams in terms of the underlying data, what our observations are about each team and the key men, and then next week, we're going to have a bit more of a look at the fixtures and how we're going to kind of make sure everything sort of fits together with the upcoming congestion. Over kind of the next few weeks, you've got the spectre of 3 game weeks in 7 days between game weeks 14 and 16, for example, when Amazon start to take the broadcasting mantle again, which kind of always seems to be a seasonally thing around sort of December time. So if you're in the UK, of course. So on the screen, if you watch on YouTube, the graphic is all teams sorted by XG rank, also includes things like actual league position, team XGC, and the next 5 fixture scores according to the fixture analyzer on Fantasy Football Hub. Other fixture tickers are available, but just to give an idea, I suppose, of how good the fixtures are for the next few. We will look more into fixtures next week, so that'll be one that we kind of breeze over a little bit this week. It's more really about looking at how the first almost third of the season has unfolded. It's 32% of the season that's passed now, so we can call that a third charitably, a margin of error. And I suppose as well, use that to help us project forward a little bit today, a lot next week. And I think maybe it might be quite fun to go from kind of bottom to top, actually, to review what we've seen and think of in terms of the kind of the FPL ramifications per team, the data they're posting, and to kind of try to link it together with kind of the fixture rating to come and kind of get a touch on kind of some fixtures and maybe some sort of plans. But yeah, we're going out on the open road, really, taking it team by team, talking about players of interest and touching on fixtures effectively, always with that FPL relevance in mind. So I'm very sorry if we give a team you support short shrift this time round. Just to kind of foreground all of this, a friend of ours, the pods, the Talisman Theory data man, the data scientist who helps me out a lot with that, Mitchell Sterling, he said to me earlier on, after 120 games, we're still averaging over 3 goals per game at the moment in the Premier League. This is the first time over 3 since 1967-68, and the most since 1965-66. So yeah, a record-breaking season in terms of goals scored thus far, in terms of the averages. And we've seen a very low rate of clean sheets by consequence. So 51 clean sheets in those games thus far, a rate of 0.43 clean sheets per game. Last year at this point, it was 0.56. So a real drop down there. And I think that kind of makes sense, doesn't it, given that kind of the football we've been observing, Sam?
Yeah, there's a lot of very front-footed teams at the moment based on the philosophy of the coaches that these teams have brought in. There's a real rush towards attractive football these days and building up from the back and playing with pace through the lines and leaving yourself open to risk at the back. So there are more goals at the moment. There are far fewer clean sheets, but that means more FPL returns in our starting lineups going forwards, with less of an emphasis on defenders at the moment, especially from a clean sheet point of view. We're looking at the defenders who are banking a little bit better on the underlying data in terms of assists and goal threat and hoping that they can pull through for us. Obviously, this week, the only return I got in my back 3 was a goal. And I don't think I've gotten a clean sheet in quite a while, but at least the last 2 weeks, I don't think. And I think the only meaningful clean sheet that most of us got this week was Tsimikas. That I can think of anyway off the top of my head. So yeah, clean sheets are becoming rarer and rarer at the moment. And I think that is a trend that's going to continue this season based on the way that a lot of these teams are set up and how the coaches like to approach the game.
Yeah, definitely. It's been exciting, hasn't it, really? It's just there's been a lot of kind of occasions where the goals are coming flying in from all sorts of players, not necessarily the ones in the FPL template, which has been sort of the only kind of drawback perhaps we've seen. But for me, that's made it more exciting. And I think that we were saying the other week, weren't we, that and I was saying to you over the weekend too, that I'm kind of enjoying the season a lot more because it feels like there's that sort of openness to it a little bit. Like we're not all kind of corralled around kind of a few players. Well, yeah, there are a few. We've mentioned that a little bit, and then there's also the element that. And by this time last year, I was doing pretty well, and the entire game plan changes. It's just cover. That's all you do. Cover everything off. All the risks done. Your risk factor is like 0. Whereas now, you've got that sort of scope to really kind of try things and do things. Maybe my natural habitat is being a chaser. I think that maybe that's kind of where it is. But hey, there we go. So let's get into these teams then. There are 3 teams at the moment here. Whose team XG is lower than Erling Haaland's. So I think we can try to kind of take them. We'll take them one by one still. But apologies to fans of you know who you are. Sheffield United, Burnley, and Fulham, whose team XG is actually lower than Luton's in 4th and bottom. So Sheffield United at bottom in terms of XG rank with just 9.2. They're not very far off Mo Salah, also being better than them in terms of team XG, and team XGC. Obviously also rooted at the bottom of the table down in 20th, which is not fantastic really, is it? And the key man for Sheffield United in terms of the FBref data is Ollie McBurney, 1.7 non-pen XGI overall, which is 120th, something like that. It's not fantastic. Like Issa Kabore, Shea Dozie, Benny, Joe Linton, Willie Bolly, Frank Onyeka, Willian. The list goes on of players who are better than the Sheffield United sort of lead man in the data. And I guess it's not too unexpected given the events in the summer, selling the 2 best players just before the season dawned. Not fantastic either. And Dye and Berger, or Burge, I'm not never sure which way around that is. And the Crown Prince not looking to invest anymore and looking to sell. It's all been about Cameron Archer really as being sort of a bench pick, and I had like George Baldock at the start of the season as well as a bench pick. But with them, it is really all about that, isn't it? And sadly, I think they're just pretty much going straight down, aren't they? There's not really too much about them other than to try to not fall prey to Derby-itis.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as far as FPL goes, Archer is literally the only pick any of us have got any interest in with Sheffield United. And I find it very interesting that he's not even the top talismanic player for Sheffield United at the moment either. So that could be a little bit of a worry. I think the one thing going for him is he is almost the cheapest forward you can possibly bring in. And therefore he's an easy player to just sort of have on your bench most weeks, but you can't really rely on him to start too often. He's only returned in 2 different games this season so far. And I think his XG per 90 is around 0.07, 06, which I'm pretty sure on checking the other day is exactly the same as William Saliba so far. So it's not exactly ideal for a striker. And Sheffield United do look like a team that unfortunately don't currently have enough to survive in the Premier League. As you can see, bottom of both metrics here. I think the XGC is a lot lower because of that one game against Tottenham. But even without that, it's still got quite a lot wrong with it. So I don't think that they're a team that we've got any interest in whatsoever. I'm more than happy to move on and look at the other teams.
Yeah, so it's probably a similar story for Burnley. Again, 19th. They're actually bottom of the league at the moment in terms of overall league position. Sheffield United are above them, but still, Team XG is 10 on the nose. Team XGC, they're actually 16th for that. So there are a few teams worse off than them. Luton, West Ham, which is a bit of a surprise. We'll come on to that in a little bit. And Bournemouth. So yeah, defending perhaps not as bad, as bad as it looks. But yeah, in terms of Team XG, it's not very great, not very good at all. And Lyle Foster, who's now taking a leave of absence, sadly, due to mental health. Wish him all the best, obviously. Not he's going to listen to this pod, but you know what I mean. He's a sweet 69 overall, 2.7 his non-pen XGI. Burnley, another team that I think just are kind of clearly in the if they have a double bracket. That's pretty much it. I don't think there's too much to say on them, Sam. Is there? Fulham next, I suppose, are doing a little bit better, aren't they?
Yeah, Fulham are an interesting one because they're a lot lower, especially in the XG rank, than you'd expect a team like Fulham to be. An XG of 12.3 so far after 12 games suggests that they're averaging a goal a game in terms of the underlying data, which isn't fantastic. I mean, their defense is a little bit better, but we're still talking comfortably bottom half here. So I do wonder with Fulham, especially without Mitrovic up top now, whether they're a team that really have that much about them going forwards and whether they can actually find the back of the net. I think Raul Jimenez scored his first goal of the season over the weekend against Villa, which we'll come on to later. So I just can't see him mustering 10 plus goals for a team like Fulham at the moment. And you do wonder where those returns are coming from. So I just don't think they're a side that you can really bank on either moving forwards or at the back. So again, sadly, they're a team that maybe we just have no FPL interest in whatsoever at the moment. Even the likes of Andreas hasn't really been an option for us, with so many other midfielders around his price point performing much, much better.
Exactly. I think the only kind of thing, and to touch on fixtures very slightly, the only thing in Fulham's favour are those upcoming fixtures up until Boxing Day. So they've got a couple of tough games in there: Liverpool in Gameweek 14, Newcastle in Gameweek 17. But the rest of the games are really good, and they've got 3 home fixtures for the next 4: home against Wolves, Nottingham Forest, and West Ham, 13, 15, 16. So that's over that sort of those 3 games in a week. They've got Forest at home, West Ham at home on the Wednesday and the Sunday, and then over Christmas itself. On the Saturday 23rd December, they've got Burnley at home, and on Boxing Day they've got Bournemouth away. So there could be some kind of enabler potential there, potentially, if you're looking for. I don't know why you'd be looking there, looking at the data, but if all you can afford is Bassi or something, then he could be a diamond for you. 4.4. There's obviously Timmy Castagna as well, who has been a bit of a legend in the past. He is always kind of there and thereabouts. There's always kind of 1 or 2 games where he does okay. I had a look at him earlier on. I think it was like. As Sheffield United, and I think they played Luton as well recently, and those are the only games where his XGI was over 0.25. The rest of them he's done absolutely nothing. But in those quote unquote easier games, he's given license to roam. So maybe there's kind of a little bit of interest there, but you're completely right about lack of goal scorer really hampering them, and Andreas just being a bit of a non-entity. I've got him in draft actually, and again a bit of a non-entity. Probably the same as well for Luton, who are next up. So 17th for the team XG rank at 12.9. So they're now above Erling Haaland, which is good, but second from bottom for Team XGC, as you'd expect, Mr. Carlton Morris with 2.7 x non-pen XGI, which puts him about kind of 73rd, something like that, is their sort of key man. Yeah, I mean, again, a team that I think will do well if they do finish 17th. That's like a massive achievement. But with Bournemouth now kind of finding a little bit of pizzazz under Iraola, I think that it kind of feels like the bottom 3 is looking more and more sort of cut adrift. I think looking at the actual sort of table, the league positions is kind of quite instructive more than anything else, because like it kind of helps you to kind of think, oh, okay, how are things actually looking? And it is that kind of bottom 4 already looking a little bit sort of, I don't know, in trouble, shall we say? And I mean, there's only 3 points between Bournemouth and 17th and Fulham and 16th. But Luton, Sheffield United and Burnley on 4, 5 and 6 points respectively, and all kind of sporting lots of L's. It's worrying for them, isn't it, really? I don't know if it's worrying. Maybe that's just kind of what they expected, because I watched the Championship playoff game and I was quite surprised that either they or Coventry was going to be a Premier League team, to be honest, with all due respect.
Yeah, I think out of those 3 promoted sides, Burnley are the ones that I'm most surprised about. I thought they might have a bit about them under Company, but yeah, none of the 3 look like they're currently going to be surviving. Morris, out of all of those teams, seems like the one FPL-ish pick that you could look at potentially. I think he's 5.2, 5.3 now. I think he's had a couple of price drops, and obviously quite a few people went in on him for the double game week earlier this season. I think it was game week 7. And if a 5.5 million forward is required later on in the season for another double, he could be an entity. But generally speaking, across all of those 3 promoted sides, there isn't really a lot of FPL interest at the moment. And other than Issa Kabore, obviously starting for you this game week, and possibly even game week 13, I think, I don't think any of us really plan on starting many of them. Archer's on a lot of benches, but again, we've already mentioned him, not really an option to be starting week in, week out. So sadly for them, they do look a little bit cut adrift, all 3. Bournemouth with sort of the next best, and then after that we really get into quite a plethora of teams that are looking like they could have some FPL options for us at some point.
Yeah, it's very tricky, isn't it? I mean, it's Kabore, Charlie Taylor, I know Tendon Mengi at Luton's the last kind of playing 3.9 defender, just because there's so many injuries in Luton defence at the moment. But yeah, no, it's not great. Next in the team XG is Forest, 13.1. So not very far ahead of Luton. It's 0.2 overall. Defensively though, just inside the bottom half, so 11th overall for team XGC, 18.4, which is obviously quite pleasing. And at Tyro Awani, really good sort of level of just continuous production. Effectively scored last week as well, last weekend as well. 29th overall in terms of being the key man for non-pen XGI. I think most of our interest thus far has been only Matt Turner, who has recently been replaced by Odysseus Vlachodimos. But yes, I again, good fixtures coming up for them. 2 home games in a row: Brighton at home and Everton at home. And actually, the kind of the trio of games in that December again: Everton at home, Fulham away, Wolves away. All okay. No, more than okay games. So if you did want to punt on a player like Awani, or indeed kind of a favourite like Gibbs White, who always kind of struck me as a very good sort of draft pick, but hasn't quite kind of put it together this year. Maybe kind of lack of Brendan Johnson, Sam, is kind of what's kind of gone on there a little bit, and Ilanga has not really kind of filled the role as they'd have liked.
Yeah, to be fair to Ilanga, I don't think he's been too bad. I think it's just Morgan Gibbs-White at the moment, as much as we all thought maybe he would kick on and he'd be good value for money, it just hasn't really shown in the returns so far this season. Or maybe the system slightly changed. Awani obviously has been performing well. He had a little bit of a cold streak until his return this weekend. I think it was he hadn't scored in 6, weirdly, after a period of scoring every single week. I think I overheard that on Match of the Day, so don't quote me.
He got injured, to be fair.
But I think it was 6 matches that he was playing in. He hadn't scored in, which is in. I heard it on Match of the Day, so I haven't fact checked that.
I think it's much more than that. I think he got like a couple of. I think it was one at the start of the season. We're like, oh yeah, he could have been an okay pick, and got a couple of assists. So I think he got like game week 5 or 6 or something. I'll look it up now. Yeah, got game week 5 or 6 or something. And then game week 5 he got a couple of assists, and then blank basically all the way up until this week just gone. It's really sad that I remember that. I'm such an intelligent guy if I didn't have this in my brain. But anyway, completely agree.
Yeah, it's almost like you do a weekly FPL podcast, But yeah, so Awani maybe is the one pick at the moment outside Matt Turner, who obviously interest is now very much dwindling once he lost his place. Awani at some point, I'm sure, will be in a few teams, especially if double game weeks come and they're a part of it. Outside of that, though, again, we're looking very much at the sort of peripheral picks in our side, maybe a bench pick here or there, maybe a defender for a week or two. But yeah, generally speaking, again, sadly, not too much interest. Maybe a little bit more in the defense because they are putting up decent numbers defensively, but it's just picking which one of them you've got any confidence in at this point, which would be the problem.
The problem as well is if you look through the minutes of those defenders,
yeah,
Bolly's the top scorer, but he only played 14 minutes last week and didn't play against Aston Villa. Harry Toffolo, second top scorer, only recently kind of come back into the team. And so it sort of goes on that you can't really see apart from this Murillo, who's from like game week 7, is the only player who's kind of played every game consistently. So you'd be kind of taking a bit of a risk there as well. Don't forget the depth of personnel at Forest. So it's one where it's nice they've got good fixtures, but we're very happy to kind of just be like, okay, you know what, see you later. They're actually 3rd overall in terms of Hub's fixture tickers analysis in terms of good fixtures coming up over the next 5. But I think it's one where it's kind of fortunate really that we're not in a position where we've got to be trying to look at them for anything. Maybe it's a little bit different though. We're starting to get into kind of a bit more FPL relevant teams now potentially for Crystal Palace, who have pleasingly a team XG of 14 and are 14th overall. It's always nice to see that, and they are 10th for team XGC, 16.8, which puts them middle of the road, which is very good indeed. That's a better XGC than the likes of Man United, West Ham, and Spurs, and I think that's kind of been enjoyed by owners of Anderson early on, and also owners of Gahey, and also owners of Johnston. Obviously, what's been going on really has the main story has been that they've had to kind of defend stoutly because they've had a bit of a problem in terms of going forward, with the lack of Eze and the lack of Michael Olise, but both are now back fit. So that's very good. And Mr. Edouard, Odson Edouard, who Patrick Vieira for some reason did not like at all. I remember owning him a couple of years ago. And I think he got him for 1 minute in double game week in kind of the 89th minute or something like that, which is always kind of a bit of a sickener. But this year, doing all right, 24th in terms of being the key man, 24th for non-pen XGI overall with 4.8, which is not bad at all, really. That's better than Brighton's top non-pen XGI man, who we'll get onto later on. So, yeah, I mean, they're a team who obviously have kind of spiked interest in defence, Sam. Eze dropped 0.4 because he's been injured. Luton up next with kind of fixtures, kind of the next three looking all right. But then running into Liverpool and Man City, I think it is in mid-December. Maybe kind of one where if you were on them for a while, great. But maybe one that I kind of wouldn't be too interested in, other than the fact that maybe if you shove Eze in, he's like a talisman and could, well, just tick along like he has done over the last couple of games.
Yeah, so I find it really interesting that Palace are this far down on the XG, and that does seem to be because they've been missing so many of their talismanic players and their creative assets. So Eze being out for a little while, Olise being out as well, has really hampered them. But now with them back in the side, they are scoring and creating much more once again. So Eze on penalties, 6.1 million at the moment. I think the only problem is, like you say, the fixtures run out pretty soon. But I think for the next 3 game weeks, it's okay. So now would probably be like the last opportunity to hop onto him, I think. There is a strategy of thinking where if you've got a spot available, you go for Eze now. And then I think it's game week 16 that you swap across to Palmer for Chelsea's good run of fixtures. So that might not be a bad idea, because then you get all of the benefit of Palace's good fixtures. You've got a penalty taker there for a knockoff 6.1, and then you can also hop across to Palmer on penalties with a good fixture run for Chelsea from 15 or 16. So that could work. Defensively, yeah, mid-table, possibly unlucky not to be a little bit higher than that as well. They always do look like a team that can keep a clean sheet. I'm never surprised when they shut out even a good side, and they've got some good defenders in their team. Gahey's a good defender. Anderson's a good defender. They're a defense-minded team, and they definitely put that ahead of going forward. So, yeah, I can expect quite a few clean sheets for them in any patch of fixtures. And when the defenders are as cheap as they are for Palace, it's always going to be an FPL option. And as soon as the good fixtures come, they'll become more and more attractive. Even Gahey without the attacking upside is a pretty decent pick at the back for a budget knockoff price.
They've got just such a rough run from game week 16 to 21.
Liverpool,
Man City, Brighton, Chelsea, Brentford, Arsenal. Woof. But yeah, it does get better. And you're right that because they're so cheap, they're just, and you've got the defensive mindedness. You wouldn't be surprised if they clean or at least kind of keep the score low, and these players are going to play, so you're going to get kind of the 90 minutes. You're going to get that kind of great kind of first bench option, but it's very much one of those where interest is kind of constrained. So maybe that kind of Eze switcheroo that you mentioned, which I have heard also mooted, which does make a lot of sense. Moving on to a team that is linked to Palace. They're both equal actually in terms of team XG, and it's Bournemouth, XG of 14 as well, and pays them equal 14th. They're 17th in the Premier League. Team SGC is what's letting them down. 24.2 is their SGC, so second from bottom, just below Sheffield United and Luton. So just above Sheffield United and Luton. No surprise to anybody that Dom Solanke is the key man there. And he's doing really well, actually, in terms of overall XG. Obviously, that does include penalties as well. But yeah, in the top 10, Solanke overall, which is really good. Really, really good. And with the fixtures to come, he could be one that could be really in a lot of managers' view. because they really, the start of the season really honked. It was really difficult starts of the season. They've already played Liverpool, Spurs, Chelsea, Man City, Newcastle, and Arsenal thus far this campaign, and Solanke's still come out of it, doing all right. He's come out of it with 6 goals from that, and he does look like just genuinely quite a serviceable centre forward. I'm not suggesting that he's going to, smash through the upper echelons of anything. But at that price, 6.4, Sheffield United up next, and kind of a really decent sort of Christmas period run of fixtures. Luton, Forest, and Fulham on between 17 and 19. Could just be a player that again, through the difficult fixtures, you just trust that he'd be starting every game, would play every game, and you get a chance of doing something every game. Even against Newcastle, there he is scoring a brace. And I think last year as well, a very strong season for Solanke. And got the most assists, I think it was, of any forward last season with 10. So yeah, I think kind of, there's not really much interest in the defenders. There's not really much interest in the midfielders. But yeah, it all kind of converges around Solanke. I don't hate that at all. I think that's quite a decent pick. And in fact, it would be one that I'd be thinking about maybe if I was in a 3-4-3 perhaps and wanted to free up some money from like an Alvarez. That would be something that I really would be looking at for next week, and just kind of leaving him there, because I think he will return over that time. It's a classic kind of talisman theory stuff, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Solanke does interest me, especially when the fixtures are good for Bournemouth. And he reminds me of one player in particular at the moment in FPL, almost a mini version of Watkins, where you just expect him to be the name on the score sheet whenever his team score a goal. And I think for a team like Bournemouth, they need to rely on someone to put it in the back of the net fairly consistently, someone talismanic, and everything sort of feeds through him at the moment in that side. So yeah, I think Bournemouth are going to be front-footed this season. We know that from the way the coach likes to set up. So if they're going to score a fair few goals, they're a lot higher in the XG than they are in the XGC for example. So Solanke could be the beneficiary from that. I don't hate it whatsoever. He's a good price. Obviously, top 10 in the underlying data and the non-penalty XGI is really, really impressive for a side like Bournemouth. So yeah, absolutely no qualms with Solanke at the moment. I think the one potential issue is fitting him in if you've got a 3-5-2 formation. But if you're going with a 3-4-3, he could easily be that third striker for you, and you can still have the likes of a Watkins sat alongside Haaland.
Yeah.
And I'd have no qualms with that whatsoever.
No, I agree with you completely. I think it was the case as well for the key man of next team, Wolves, with Neto, who is 18th overall for non-pen XGI, 5.1 before his injury, and it looks like he may come back after the international break. He was one again at just that kind of 5.5 start price. Loads of people just thought, I'm just going to love him and leave him. Just leave him there. And he's performed okay. And 52 points at that price is pretty decent. He and obviously Hwang have both done a good job. Hwang got an assist this week, was it last week? Despite Neto not being around, which is also quite good. Yeah, got an assist against Sheffield United. And Wolves in general attacking okay, 16.4 team XG 13th, and also defending kind of again all right, as where you'd expect them to be effectively, 12th overall and kind of 13th, 14th, that sort of thing. Very kind of situational pick, I think, Wolves, as usual with their players. Okay, kind of next few fixtures though, Fulham away, Arsenal away in 14, and then 2 good home games, Burnley at home and Nottingham Forest at home, 15 and 16. So could be some interest potentially, especially if Neto's back. But I don't think you'll be kind of rushing to them, would you really?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, for me, it's pretty much Neto or bust at this point. And without him in the side, I'm not too fussed. Obviously, Hwang is ticking along quite nicely. But there's just something about it. I just don't expect it to be consistent. I don't expect it to continue at the rate that we've seen from him so far this season. And without Neto, I think they'll be generally less creative. Obviously, fantastic result against Spurs. O'Neill is a good manager and he is getting the best out of them. But the underlying data still shows them to be a lower mid-table, slightly lower than mid-table side. So I don't want to get carried away with them. Neto is a fantastic player, but whilst he's out, I've got very little interest generally. And again, there are so many options around that price point. and around Hwang's price point that I just have more confidence in at this point. So yeah, I'm more than happy to swerve them for now. And then once Neto's back, and if he continues to fire at the same sort of rate and keep overperforming at the same sort of rate, then I might become slightly more interested.
Fair play. From not very much interest to a fair deal of interest, we were up to 12th in terms of team XG, and it's West Ham, 17.3. Bowen is the top man in terms of non-pen XGI overall. He's ninth with 6.6, which is pretty good. Not very far below Bruno. In fact, 0.1 below Bruno. So doing pretty well. It's just that defence. It's not great, is it? 17th, as I mentioned earlier on, for XGC rank, woe betide many of us, because many of us kind of have Alphonse or Areola in our teams, just because of the good run that we were sort of promised, but they just seem unable to keep a clean sheet, really. So it feels very much sort of like, Bowen, Kudus being in the meta, and most of us kind of just being stuck with Areola as it is. I know we've got a question on goalkeepers. I think we'll kind of answer that next week actually now. A team which is kind of surprising, but not as surprising as the next team, but still quite surprising.
Yeah, it is frustrating with Areola. Like you mentioned, we'll talk more about goalkeepers next week because we do have a couple of questions on them. But yeah, he is becoming quite a nuisance. And there are a few keepers keeping some clean sheets at this point, and they just aren't. And to start with, I thought that was more to do with the fact that they had some pretty rough fixtures at the start of the season. Now, I'm not so confident that that's the problem. I think there is something more fundamentally askew with the way that they're setting up, and I think they do look quite exposed on the break, and that once they commit men forward, all of a sudden it does look like they're less of a solid team on the counter, or resisting the counter rather. So yeah, I'm a little bit concerned there, but not enough to make a transfer immediately. Whereas going forward, Bowen has been absolute gangbusters recently. Obviously away from home he's been fantastic.
Yeah, really good.
Burnley away from home next, so no reason to think that he couldn't be potentially even as much as a captaincy option. Half jokingly posted that on X the other day, but thinking about it, it's not the most ridiculous thing. Burnley are very, very open, as we've seen from the data here. And West Ham, especially away from home, Bowen is getting a lot of goals, and the data is supporting that as well. 9th overall out of all players in FPL for the non-penalty XGI is very, very handy, and he's still under 8 million. So I think he was significantly underpriced this season. He's still well priced, even with the amount of rises that he's had. Yeah, I think he's a fantastic pick, and I'm happy to hold him for the next few fixtures at least.
Yep, 200 club member, Jared Bowen, a couple of years ago. He scored in every away game this season thus far. Really, really good. I do like Kudus as well on this players. It was very nice to see him in the flesh, as it were, after kind of owning him on Football Manager a few times. So great to see that sort of individual come through. Just a note on kind of what you said about defensively. Edson Alvarez is another sort of Football Manager legend who is very good actually in defensive midfield if you own him on Football Manager. So it's a bit of a surprise it's not kind of quite works in terms of, well, Declan Rice is probably in different stratosphere, to be fair. Never owned Declan Rice on Football Manager, because if you play as a good team on Football Manager, what's the point? Just give up. It's almost surprising, isn't it, that David Moyes' team is kind of being as leaky as this. It's not what you'd expect. It's one of those sort of lazy kind of shorthands that we kind of say, Areola in. I mean, it's a Moyes team. There's going to be some kind of gritty 0-0s, 1-0s, and Areola's going to be getting all the points. But as it is, I think was it one clean sheet and then penalty saves, basically. One penalty save in game week 2, which has kind of been pushing his case as a goalkeeper. Other than that, it's not been fantastic, really. And it's just all about that kind of that value, that because we've got him in so cheap. But I mean, I think all of us, if we had a wild card now, would be going without. Fair to say, I think.
Yeah, absolutely fair to say. I don't think any of us would choose to have Areola on a wild card now, knowing what we do know. But I think the reasoning at the time was solid enough. We didn't have enough data to suggest that West Ham had completely capitulated at the back. They might still turn it around. Obviously, Moyes is a very experienced coach, so there's no reason why they couldn't turn it around eventually. But as it stands, they look like they're much more focused on scoring goals and going forwards and using what is now a very creative and attacking side. They've got a lot of talented forward players there that they're trying to squeeze in. And yeah, maybe just defensively is not a priority that Moyes is focusing on at the moment. Fair enough. Who am I to complain? They've won a European trophy, so they're doing something right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Areola wouldn't be on my wildcard side if I had the
No.
choice now. It's definitely a budget thing. Back when we all did it, and hopefully at some point he actually does keep a clean sheet, and it will nullify the doubters a little bit.
Yeah, no, well, hopefully. On to the next team. They're sixth overall in the league, and I saw BBC MOTD, I think, tongue in cheek, posted on Sunday that they are the most informed team in the Premier League
They
at the
are.
moment, and that is Man United, 11th overall in terms of team XG. And 13th overall in terms of team XGC. Bruno being currently the kind of the star man in terms of non-pen XGI overall with the 6.7. But a team that have really kind of, I guess, rocked the boat for a lot of us because, as we were saying at the start of the season, hey, and one of my kind of season on bold claims, which is going to fall into abeyance, was that I was expecting to have Bruno and Rashford both in my team for an awfully long time. And it's Rashford particularly, it's just not been at the races, down 0.4 in terms of price overall, and decent-ish sort of fixtures recently. It's fair to say. Luton, Fulham, the Man City game, obviously a bit of kind of a bit of an exception. Sheffield United before that, and kind of have been kind of recording those sort of 1-0 sort of victories, shading past teams that they have no business shading past, as it were, and players, managers that is, who have owned the likes of I don't think we've got Lindelof, but Dalot, Maguire, and so on and so forth, and ghost teams of Onana have been doing all right. But they are a team, as I said, who have surprised us, and they are a team who I think that we had, it's fair to say, Sam, expected to be playing a much bigger part in our teams in terms of FPL than they actually have this season.
Yeah, 100%. And there's an old saying that the league table doesn't lie, but after 12 games, I think it is susceptible to one or two lies. And from what we can interpret here, it is lying in Man United's case a little bit. They're 11th in the XG and they are 13th in the XGC. So in terms of the data alone, they are a mid-table side right now. Now, that is obviously based on a very limited sample size, but sixth in the league is probably doing them a little bit too much of a favour. And I think anyone actually watching the matches so far would agree in the fact that they don't look like a fluid, well constructed team at the moment. They have had a lot of issues injury wise, and I'm sure they will pull it together because they do have a lot of very talented individuals in that side. But as it stands at the moment, they are not really a factor in IFPL thinking generally, other than Bruno, who's obviously an analytics darling. But generally speaking, they've been a disappointment so far. And players like Rashford just look completely bereft of confidence right now. So again, even with good fixtures that they have had recently, I was more than happy to swerve them for the time being. Yeah, they're just not a factor for us at the moment. They're just slightly too expensive to take a punt on when you've got other options at 8 million that are outperforming the likes of Bruno, the likes of Rashford quite comfortably at the moment. It's just an easy choice to go without them and wait for the form to return, wait for some sort of consistency. And also, I think I'm right in saying they haven't beaten a side by more than one goal so far this season, in the league at least. So again, they're not blowing teams away, even teams that you would expect them to. So the big hauls are definitely not there for the likes of Bruno or the likes of Rashford at the moment. So yeah, again, I'm more than happy to just wait until they do start picking up those results and then can hop on tentatively later on.
My mind goes back to the start of the season when we were kind of, and for good reason, I'm not kind of saying this was stupid, but we kind of saying we kind of have to have United sort of defensive asset to cover the ownership off. And then we kind of were looking at, obviously, Bruno, Rashford, and the likes of like Mason Mount was in the conversation at United, kind of thinking there'll be 2-8s in front of Casemiro. Incredible, really, how kind of those early season assumptions kind of fall off. We did a couple of weeks ago. Start of season, we know nothing. I think Man United are kind of testament to that truth almost, given how they've gone thus far. Obviously, it's very sad. We're both torn up about how bad United are. We do not enjoy this one bit. But yeah, they are actually worse than Team 14th in the league, who have had a massive resurgence under Sean Dyche. And that is Everton, 18th overall, 10th overall for Team XG with 18, and 6th overall in terms of Team XGC. So very good defence thus far as well, 15.6, which is very decent. The Duke, Ducore, one of those sorts of sleeper picks, I'd probably term him as, Sam. 12th overall in terms of non-pen XGI thus far, and just kind of keeps returning. He's playing that sort of number 10 role. I don't think I'd ever kind of posited him as being a natural number 10, but there's been kind of quite a few clutches of decent returns from him, summed up obviously by the goal and assist versus Crystal Palace this weekend. But for the price, a player who's of interest, as is Calvert-Lewin, who's now back fit, and the fixtures are middling, so I think that we're really stretching it. I don't think they're going to be a team that we're going to be running to. In fact, I think probably the main sort of interest for most people is going to be Jared Brentwaite, who at 4.0 is going to be on a lot of people's benches, and some people may kind of be stuck with Pickford still or something like that. But yeah, a team that maybe, if you were playing FPL without really kind of thinking about the template or whatever, you might want to consider a little bit, because it's quite surprising, isn't it, how well they're doing in terms of the overall data, as Sean Dyche himself pointed out.
Yeah, absolutely. I was as shocked as anyone knowing that Sean Dyche is a massive XG fan, which is fantastic. But yeah, the data suggests that they're actually a pretty decent side now. He's really turned it around. I saw a graph earlier on X as well showing the sort of long run average of the way that XG and XGC is mapping out for Everton over the last couple of seasons. And Dyche has consistently been improving in both directions. So yeah, Everton at the moment are looking like a side on the up. They look like a side with a plan. XGC wise as well, they're 6th in the league for their ranking. So the likes of Branthwaite could be a really good pick as a budget enabler at some point. Decore as well, 5.7 non-penalty XGI so far this season. 12th overall, like you mentioned. That is better than some very, very staple picks, such as, for example, Anthony Gordon, Bukayo Saka, Matoma. All of these players are below him, and Neto as well, I might add, are all below him in terms of the non-penalty XGI so far this season. So he is a sleeper pick, like you mentioned. He is a hard player to predict. That's maybe the problem with him. You never know when he's going to pop up with a goal, a late run into the box, or a jammy assist. But he has got the data to back it up. So yeah, I think he could at some point become a factor in our seasons, and he's at a decent price as well. I think it's just there are, in inverted commas, sexier picks that you like from
that's
classically better sides that are at the same price. So you kind of put him to one side and know that his ownership's always going to be low enough that he'll never dent your FPL scores if he hauls. So yeah, he's probably the best of the picks that we're never going to really think about, sadly. But yeah, I mean, the data's there. If you want to take a punt on him, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't.
Absolutely. I mean, Everton are just below another team that kind of surprises me in terms of their kind of XG rank overall, and that's Spurs. They're 4th overall on the table now, but 9th in terms of team XG at 19.2, 12th in terms of team XGC, and Son, unsurprisingly, the key man to non-pen XGI. Let's take them and Brighton together as two teams who are kind of almost surprising in terms of where they are overall. Brighton 8th overall in terms of league position, 8th in terms of the XG rank 2, a little bit ahead of Tottenham, and 9th in terms of XGC. Matoma is their kind of key man in terms of non-pen XGI overall. He's 30th in terms of the tables. So really struggling to find that consistency, perhaps Brighton. Both of them seem surprising, I think, just because I expect Tottenham to be doing better. So to Brighton to be doing better. And I'm surprised that Brighton's sort of key man is kind of so low on the list almost. So yeah, I think both of those teams obviously highly FPL relevant, but perhaps it's not really coming through in terms of the overall data as it is. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, so I think what is really interesting with Brighton, Mitoma being 30th as their top performer, really shows how much they're spreading the attacking threat this season. And they're still doing all right. I mean, they're still a top 8 side in terms of the XG. But the fact that they've not got anyone in, well, they've got one player at 30th. So I was going to say no one in the top 30. They're spreading that XG across their side, across their front line. And they've got a few options that are getting reasonable minutes at the moment. Mitoma just isn't taking that talismanic role. And I don't think any of us really expected him to. We were just hoping he'd be the 90-minute man that would overall net the highest of the picks at Brighton. But sadly, they're just sharing it around too much for any of them to be particularly exciting at the moment. Whereas with Spurs, it's almost the opposite. You've got Son up top, who's now hogging all of the XG, all of the underlying data, and is now 6th in the overall scoreboard for all players. And I would suggest that that might even be higher if he'd actually started the season at centre forward as well, because the underlying data since he took up that role has been really positive, with the one issue being that Maddison is now out probably until the new year, and that could negatively impact him. So yeah, they're both interesting for I think very slightly different reasons. Tottenham were outperforming what the data was suggesting up until this point, and maybe now they're slowly reverting back to what we might expect of them. Whereas Brighton, as I hinted at last week, I have them pinned as a somewhere between 5th and an 8th placed best side in the league, and I think the data suggests that's pretty much where they're at so far this season. They'll drop a few points here and there. They've got some good players, but they're all sharing the minutes because of Europe. Can we really trust any of them? Survey says no at the moment for me personally, but maybe later on in the season they'll become options once again.
I agree. I feel like Brighton are kind of situationally interesting as a team, effectively. And you always have to bear in mind that context of Europe. I mean, the last 3 weeks, they were obviously really interesting because they had Fulham, Everton, and Sheffield United, and they got Nottingham Forest next up. So maybe you definitely, I can't really fault anybody who kind of piled into like some Matoma. But it is one of those where that, in terms of Europe, was just, I think, and I don't think we're hindsighting too hard to say, was a good reason to kind of think actually maybe not. And I don't know. I think it was one that we spoke about when Fran was on, that it was kind of quite good for our kind of overall psyche to not have to be kind of worrying about them too much. Yes, Matoma's ownership overall is pretty high, but I think the engaged ownership is fairly low, and it's a team where you're right. The XG is kind of spread out a lot. Like last year, you have Matoma, Gross, and Solly March, who are all in the top sort of 25 in terms of kind of team player XGI. But it's just not happened so far from this year. The likes of Matoma, Adingra, Franz Mann, all situational picks, but and João Pedro as well to some extent. A lot of us had him at the start of the season. Situational picks, but players that you're not particularly going to be running to because there's always sort of other steadier options. And Son, of course, is kind of you're happy to kind of just leave him in as that sort of option. That's why I went back to him this week. So I was thinking, well, you know what? Even though Spurs, yes, the fixtures aren't amazing and had a few key injuries, given the way Anne just said they're going to have a go no matter what. You've got to be thinking to yourself, okay, I'm more than happy to hold that. The defence being ravaged by those injuries as well was part of the reason why I sold Pedro Porro. Obviously, then went on and got the assist. But hey, that's kind of what can tend to happen. But yeah, the data's not really there in terms of the defence either. They're the only team in kind of they're kind of 12th overall for team XGC rank, as I said. Only team in kind of they're kind of they've got the biggest difference between their kind of overall league position and their SGC rank. It's one where you maybe be looking at them. I think their Christmas is okay. I think that they kind of got. I'm sure they've got Everton and Brighton kind of around Christmas and New Year. So maybe you go back to them then. It'll be really interesting to see what happens when Son leaves for the Asian Cup and kind of how they're going to cope with that. I've definitely seen kind of some suggestions that, for example, Brennan Johnson could be an interesting player to kind of keep an eye on. But yeah, I mean, they are a team where you kind of, it's kind of a one-player team, I think now, unless you've kind of got a residual Udogi or a residual kind of Porro, something like that. Maybe Udogi bench 4.5, you bench him this week, just keep him like the Crystal Palace player was talking about earlier on, just first bench, play if there's a good game, fine if he comes on, you might get something. But yeah, the interest definitely tapered off after an explosive start to the season. Team in third ahead of those guys, Arsenal. Down to 7th overall in terms of XG rank, team XG rank, which again I was a bit surprised by. Our defence is very good though. Team XGC of 9.2, which makes us first, despite being 7th overall for team XG, and third in the table. Bukayo Saka is the key man, unsurprisingly. But as we've spoken about several times, Sam, it hasn't really gone anywhere, has it? For Arsenal, and the attack just there seems to be something missing. Where it's not quite in gear yet. Maybe it is kind of Jesus has struggled to stay fit, but frustratingly for me, I've had Martinelli for the last 3 weeks, and he's not really at the races quite yet either. Still regaining match sharpness after injury, and despite the fixtures still being quite decent, they're in terms of their kind of hub fixture analyzer rank, their fixtures are kind of seen as being kind of the third or fourth best overall over the next sort of 5 weeks, and they're certainly pretty good over Christmas. It's still sort of if you aren't an Arsenal, if you've got kind of one Arsenal player, so you've just got Saka, maybe be looking more at a defender really at the moment, given the underlying data, than looking at an attacker, which is quite. I never thought I'd be saying that about Arsenal at this point.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. The defensive data is absolutely phenomenal. They're the only team who have an XGC so far of under 10. So again, slightly maybe surprising that they're ahead of City as well, which is rare. Usually City have by far the most sturdy and strong defence. But Arsenal at the moment seem to be a side that are keeping those clean sheets at regular intervals. Obviously didn't this week. But again, if you've got an Arsenal defender, or if you're looking at a defender at the moment, Arsenal are probably a pretty good way to go. Moving forwards, they just don't look like they're flowing at the moment. The system has slightly been tweaked this year now to incorporate Rice, I think, and it just doesn't look natural at the moment. Ødegaard being out isn't helping as well. And even when he was in, it seemed like he was almost being given a slightly different role to the way that we were seeing him previously last season. So all of these little cogs were coming together to maybe create something that wasn't flowing the same way as we expect from them. But over time, I still think that they're slowly picking up, they're slowly clicking into gear, and they're getting used to the way that they're being told to play this season and their new shape. And I think we will see them slowly rise up this leaderboard. The other thing to mention as well is that the teams that we're about to discuss that are ahead of them, I would say most of those sides are going to consistently be very attack minded. They're going to keep posting very high XG numbers throughout most of the season. So for Arsenal to actually catch up with them and overtake them in terms of the XG, in terms of the underlying data, might not be too easy, but that doesn't mean they're not also creating lots and lots of chances. It's just that other teams might be creating even more than them. So yeah, Saka has been overperforming on the underlying data a little bit so far, but he is I think the safety pick in the Arsenal attack at the moment. There are other picks that you can go to, but until the data does improve, I think it's just a wait and see on them, and definitely prioritize the defense.
You're right there. I mean, I think there's definitely a couple of factors behind it. One is missing Xhaka. I think that even though kind of Adam Pritchard on Clash Correspondence on Planet FPL really kind of articulately spoke about the role Xhaka was playing, and kind of him getting into the box and him kind of just moving the ball up the pitch and being a progressive player for us. Actually, Havertz has not quite been able to replicate that. And it's not kind of quite, as you say, clicked into place thus far. There's also, I was speaking to a couple of people at the meetup last week or the week before, and there's definitely kind of perhaps a suspicion that after last year, us just completely kind of being out of out of breath, effectively, we've come 3/4 of the way through the season. Maybe there is a conscious sort of impetus to control and make sure that we conserve that energy for the kind of the long season ahead, based on the learnings of last season. And maybe that's kind of having an impact as well. I mean, it's notable that in terms of, if you look at kind of the overall kind of expected assisted goals for us, we're kind of below 10th overall. So it's kind of maybe there's a mixture of something not really clicking, lack of intensity, all of these sort of issues which are sort of affecting our play at the moment. That said, we are still third, and we're in a kind of quite a sweet position with the fixtures kind of to come. Obviously, beating City was a huge fillip for us. Losing Newcastle, a little bit of a bump in the road, but decent fixtures to come. A big game against Liverpool on I think it's on Christmas Eve is the big game against Liverpool. But the rest of kind of the fixtures coming up are all sort of looking fairly winnable. There's an Aston Villa game somewhere, there's a Brighton game somewhere, but hopefully, as you said, after we kind of get into kind of the January sort of period, we'll kind of see things improve. But yeah, all about the defence at the moment. Ben White, you better bloody pay me back. That's what I'm saying. And he will be playing at Brentford. And we've spoken about the amazing sort of work that Thomas Frank's done there. The 6th overall for Team XG 22. No surprise to anybody that Brian Mbeumo 5th overall in terms of being the key man. That's the non-pen XGI data. And defensively as well, 16 Team XGC, which has them 8th. Big problem though, losing both their full first choice fullbacks, and Hickey and Enrico Henry for a long time, which has kind of changed the way they play. I've seen sort of not FPL relevant, but players like Janelt are going to be kind of called into action for that. But yeah, I mean, they're an interesting team because their fixtures over the next few are just so damn good. I think that they've probably got on paper the best sort of 3 after the Arsenal game of the kind of during that week. It's Luton, Brighton, and Sheffield United, and then they got Villa, and then they've got that blank. So it's a very sort of tricky team to be navigating around. I mean, if you've got Flecken, probably going to be keeping. Obviously, kind of got a bit unlucky recently with him. Got subbed off at half time recently, and I don't know whether you'd be looking at defenders, but the HCC being good because of that blank. But I think we're all looking at Mbeumo, aren't we, in for that Luton game?
Yeah, I think, again, you nailed it with the blank. I think because we've got to consider that, unless you're free hitting, you probably don't want to pile in on the defenders. As good as they've been recently, 8th in the XGC is very, very handy. But I think because Mbeumo is such a priority at this point, he's 5th overall in the non-penalty XGI so far this season for all players, and he's on penalties. So that just makes him all the more valuable. He's incredibly well priced, under 7 million still, I believe. So yeah, he's a player that I'm very, very interested in getting back to as quickly as possible. And yeah, he just seems like such an easy hold whilst the fixtures are even half decent, which they are for quite a long time for Brentford. And if you've only got that one Brentford asset, you can probably avoid the free hit in game week 18 if you're smart about it. So yeah, and Mbeumo takes a priority. He's far and away the best Brentford asset to be owning at the moment. Wissa at the start of the season looked like he might be an option, but Mbeumo just being on penalties just takes him way out ahead.
Yeah, and set pieces as well.
There's just so much going for him. There's so much. And he is good at the set pieces and at the penalties as well, which really does help. So yeah, I mean, he's fantastic value for money. And I will be trying to squeeze him in as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you at all for that. Oh, God, we'll talk about it next week because there's definitely one to be discussing. 2 teams now, Brentford and Newcastle. Villa, Newcastle and Villa. Newcastle 5th overall for Team XG, 23.4, and Villa very, very, very close indeed, 23.5 in 4th. Newcastle's defence slightly better, 13.4 in terms of team XGC, and up in 3rd. Villa, as we've seen recently, if you've owned Matty Cash and had to kind of face palm your way through him conceding every week, 7th in terms of XGC rank. But 2 teams, I think, who are kind of doing okay in terms of team XG, very close together, but couldn't be further apart in terms of how you kind of view them in terms of particular players in FPL. Because with Villa, you've got Mr. Watkins, third overall for non-pen XGI, another head in hand sort of miss this weekend. It's fair to say. Did get his goal, did get one bonus, got a yellow card. That's his first goal I think he's actually scored for me, Sam, this season. Here we are on game week 12, and compared to that, Newcastle, Wilson and Isaac as sharing the mantle as being the key striker has meant that we're looking at Anthony Gordon, who is actually their key man in terms of the XG, non-pen XGI overall. He's got 5, which puts him in 19th. And I did have double check that. I'll double check it again just in case Wilson has kind of snuck in there somewhere. You expect him to, but he hasn't. So you've got kind of one team, potentially a bit like Brighton, Sam, and Newcastle, who are a bit sort of talismanless, and it's been, the points have been kind of mainly focused on defense, particularly Trippier, whereas with Villa it has been sort of Watkins, Douglas Luiz, a more sort of, I guess, easily kind of worked out concentration of where the points are going to be. Both of these teams have kind of had okay runs. Newcastle's will continue. You spoke about that on the last pod of the pod before, that over the next sort of 8-9 weeks they're okay up until Boxing Day, I think it is. They've got very decent fixtures. They do have Chelsea and Man United coming up next. Be more worried about about the Chelsea fixture than the United one. Whereas Villa are coming to the end of their good fixtures. So after Bournemouth, they play Man City and Arsenal, I think it is, off the top of my head, and back-to-back fixtures. Yeah, two interesting teams, and maybe one that we'll be leaping off in terms of Villa. It sounds like fairly soon. I think Gameweek 18, they've got Sheffield United, so maybe there'll be kind of scope to keep Watkins. Whereas with Newcastle, it presents a bit of a puzzle, especially if you don't own Trippier. I mean, you're sat with Lascelles, and that feels like that's kind of like all right. You don't really want to be over-investing in them, do you? Despite the fact they're doing all right, even though they're 7th, but good fixtures to come.
Yeah, I think the fact I'm on Lascelles makes it palatable, but I was really worried with the way they performed against Bournemouth. They looked like a team that were just starting to show signs of just how many injuries they've got, just how much effort they're having to put in the European ties as well. And they do now look a little bit leggy. So I think the break has probably come at a good time for them to maybe get a couple of bodies back fit again. They are a team that's set up for that talismanic striker. So missing out on having either Wilson or Isaac at the top of the pitch, holding up the ball and almost feeding into them is hampering them quite badly at the moment, I think, as well. So all of these factors are making Newcastle a less appealing team to be looking at having assets in. That being said, a lot of them are very cheap. So the ones that are options, like Anthony Gordon, for example, are still ticking along with decent data and are very, very cheap. So you could hold on to them. But I think the fixtures aren't good enough that I'd be like, yeah, he's locked in my team no matter what happens. Like, he's not that talismanic for them. He's not putting up numbers good enough for me to just be like, he's cheap enough that I can just hold him for the season. I will be looking at other options, especially the likes of Cole Palmer, for instance, could easily be a make weight. Lascelles can just be a hold. I think because he's 4 million, I can have him sat on my bench through any rough fixtures and play him in the easier games, even with defensive frailties and different issues creeping in for them at the moment. I still think that they'll keep a fair amount of clean sheets over the next few. And the XGC rank suggests they're still a good defense. Lascelles has not been a bad defender since he's come in at all. They've still been performing well. So, yeah, I'm more than happy to own him, especially because he's only 4 million.
I think, the injuries, particularly for Newcastle, are really showing. Like, I posted a Football Manager screenshot this week, watching them play against Bournemouth, because they all looked really tired, to be honest. I mean, it's kind of, they're kind of what Spurs were last season, perhaps, in terms of overperforming, because they didn't really have to deal with the rest of the stuff that was going on. Obviously, got the Carling Cup Carabao Cup a final, etc. But the extra obligations in Europe, coupled with the kind of the perfect storm of the injuries that they're facing, meant that you had Gordon up front, and that was not really a good thing against Bournemouth, and it didn't really kind of work. That extra sort of exertion's really showing for them. And they're a team for who the international break was really kind of much needed, I'd suggest. Really sort of what we might see with Spurs if they don't kind of reinforce and get a lot of squad depth and also have injuries next year. That's kind of what's happened in Newcastle right now. You're right to think themselves is fine. You're right to think that Barry Gordon is fine. Keeping on Harvey Barnes coming back, but I mean that feels like another sort of option that will kind of take a player away from you. And there are kind of a few interchangeable parts, because I mean Gordon's 5.7. We both got him at 5.5, didn't we, or 5.6, something like that. So, I mean, ideally, I think we'd be looking to kind of upgrade him to an Mbumo sort of character eventually, and has played his role well, and hopefully he'll play his role well next week. And but I think after that, kind of it may be a case of kind of right, see you later, mate. But yeah, I mean, he's been fine. He's been absolutely fine. He's a situational player. But I mean, if you had Trippier, I think you probably would kind of keep hold at the moment. And I feel, there's some sympathy maybe if you went with Livramento, for example, this week. But yeah, it's one of those, isn't it? Obviously, he will play next week because Lewis Hall can't play. So yeah, hopefully you get something against Chelsea. But yeah, it's all sort of questionable, isn't it, at the end of the day? Yeah, a very interesting team. Whereas for Villa, they are a team that we're going to be probably looking to move off. But they are, again, doing a lot of goals, aren't they, really? So they are a team that you'll be kind of going off, but it's probably going to be a bit of a call that you're going to have to kind of consider quite heavily. They've scored the third most goals this season, what's any team of all teams, and you still kind of fancy Watkins to come through, don't you, Sam? Even if you do kind of sell him, thinking, you know what, right, I'm going to go somewhere else during the City and Arsenal games, going back to Alvarez, for example. You may still kind of think, maybe I would kind of just leave him there. Because he may well score in those games, and you've got that kind of game week 18 to come. And yeah, maybe we said at the start of the season he was of interest as being kind of a long-term season keeper. It may be kind of a testing point may come soon. I think that'll be one we'll talk about next week as well. Speaking of Alvarez, Man City obviously first in the league, third for Team XG 24.4, second in terms of Team XGC. Concentration, big issue really. Always going to see one, and unsurprisingly, Erling Haaland top for non-pen XGI overall, first with 12.2, quite a long way above Salah as well. Yeah, I mean, next few weeks, if you don't own Haaland, should you be worried? Liverpool at home, Spurs at home, Aston Villa away. You can skin that cat both ways, can't you? And say those are really difficult fixtures. But I'm captaining Haaland against Liverpool, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it both ways, but the way that Pep will be looking at it is they are tough fixtures that City are going to really have to fight to win all three of. But from an FPL point of view, those are three fixtures that I'd expect Man City to have a lot of fun in scoring quite a few goals in. I don't expect Liverpool, Spurs without Romero or Van der Ven, or Aston Villa to be able to keep them out. So I think Haaland is a fantastic pick for the next 3 game weeks. He's arguably even a captaincy option in all 3 of them. So yeah, I would be worried genuinely. Yeah, I mean, there's such a large amount of concentration towards his underlying data out of all of the City players. So if you've got Alvarez, he's posting, I think, 0.5-ish XGI per 90, whereas Haaland is double that. So you are paying for that premium, but Haaland is just posting great figures once again. He's on over a goal a game. Yeah, I wouldn't be going without him personally going into those 3 fixtures. I think he'll score 3+ goals across those 3 games.
Yeah, I agree. I think in general, again, they're kind of similar to Brentford in that you want them definitely for the games after that tough sort of trio. And just before that blank, they got Luton away, Crystal Palace at home, and they come back from their international responsibilities with a game against Everton, the game against Sheffield United, and a potential double somewhere along the line. Second half of the season, again, they're looking all right. It's going to be a case really, and I think we'll definitely discuss this next week, about thinking about if you get another one, what you do, especially if you're looking getting in Boomer as well, assuming you've already got Holland, or you're probably going to hold them back for that Luton game, how you sort of navigate the next few weeks. That's going to be a really fascinating path to sort of explore, which I'm going to leave for next week because I know what time we're at. But yeah, I think, are you surprised to see them at third, Sam, or is it just a case of them getting into second gear, just easily floating their way to the top? Obviously, a bit of a curtailment against Chelsea this week, but I mean, are you surprised to see them in terms of where they are in terms of their kind of XG rank overall at the moment?
Maybe a fraction, but from the way I interpret City, they tend to start seasons off at a fairly canterous pace. They don't really start to explode until the back end. And I think Arsenal, as we mentioned earlier, may be taking a bit of a page out of the Man City book on how to start a season at the moment. I think they're just going through the gears. They're figuring out the system for the year, what tweaks might need to be made because teams are reacting and setting up to them slightly differently. They're still in the top three. They're still posting really good numbers. They're not far behind the likes of, well, the next two who we'll mention. I won't give away who's first and second, although you can probably work it out for yourselves at this point. And obviously the XGC is very good as well. So I think there's really nothing to be worried about here. City will probably end up in the top two for XG and almost certainly the top two for XGC come the end of the season. And that's a pretty winning combination. So yeah, I'm sure that they will be exactly where we expect them to be come the end of the season.
Yeah, perfect. Second for Team XG rank, I double check this. And there's a really good, 11fi on FP on Twitter. Wrote a really good piece on this on his newsletter about Chelsea doing really well, actually, of a second overall in terms of Team XG thus far this season. Most of them missed by Nicholas Jackson, of course, 25.2. Jackson fourth overall in terms of non-pen XGI. Team XGC as well, fifth, and 10th in terms of league position. So underlying data supports that they are much better than they're showing. Pochettino having a bit of an effect, at least on the pitch. It's just not quite showing in terms of how they're doing in terms of the table. A team that I suppose we've got a little bit of a hangover in terms of our perception of these players, this team, because there was that sort of much vaunted easy run of fixtures between game weeks 3 and 8, when things didn't really turn out as we wanted them to. All jumped on Sterling after the Luton game. We're not all FPL Fran able to kind of look at that crystal ball, and he did do nothing. All sold him, and then against Burnley, off he went again. And really, really entertaining game, I've got to say, on Sunday. Sad you missed some of it, Sam. Oh God, what a game that was. It's incredible. Chelsea able to just keep serving up these incredible fixtures. And a team that, Newcastle, Brighton and Man United next three, so aren't going to garner that much attention, but then again into a really nice run in game week 16 all the way into the middle of January. Were you surprised to see them sat there second in terms of XG rank? I was just like, wow. And I guess maybe it's kind of the difference between the kind of popular perception and kind of the underlying data. And yes, if you're an analyst FC, you knew that, and we're telling you, we're kind of preaching to the choir. But still, I think that's something that's really fascinating. Cole Palmer, gift from the gods, isn't he? Really.
Yeah, I was surprised to see them this high. I knew they were doing well on the underlying data because my friends and I from university have a group chat where they've been bashing Chelsea all year, and I keep reiterating, no, the data's good, they'll come good, it will happen eventually. But I didn't expect them to be this high in the rankings. So there are things happening at Chelsea at the moment. There are some very good players there. The system is starting to come into focus, and I think we're all trying to figure out what patterns of play Chelsea are going to be regularly playing this season. And Palmer, as far as we know, looks like he's going to be fairly central to that. So yeah, he's an absolute diamond at under 5. Right? Is he 5.1, 5.2 million now? He might have had a couple of price
5.1.
rises. 5.1, fine. Absolute bargain. He's on penalties. There is a slight suggestion that maybe Nkunku comes back in and possibly takes penalties off of him, but he's just scored 4. I don't think there's any realistic chance of that happening. He might get slightly reduced minutes, but again, he's 5.1 million. I think he's an absolute gift. And when those fixtures turn, especially, I will be very, very interested in bringing him in as soon as possible.
Yeah, definitely. I think the fact that they are so cheap in general, we were marveling at the start of the season about the fact that their most expensive player was Sterling. I'm going to say at 7.
Yeah, I think
Maybe
so.
there was Nkunku 7.5. But we're all marveling about that, weren't we? And then now we've kind of again got a bit of a gift when the fixtures do turn. So you're kind of hoping, watching and waiting, hoping they sustain this. And then there we go again. I mean, I think there's going to be definitely something to be said about Jackson as well when we do get there. A bit of a Nunez sort of character, I think it's fair to say, where you don't really want to be watching him play, but you know that there's the data underneath that will mean that you've got a chance of him doing well regardless. It's striking really just to see the blanks versus the numbers. If you do go on FPL, look at the XG and look at the actual kind of points scored. So many options there, and also perennially injured Reece James, I think, is going to again come onto the radar at some point soon. Man's got the assist, looked really good, I thought, against City for fits and starts. But again, I was asked by Pochettino, "Are you okay, mate?" Yeah, I'm fine. They got subbed off because he may have had an injury. So one of those players that I think I'm going to avoid the siren call of. I'm sure I know loads will go for it, remembering what happened a few years ago. But one of those players I just can't ever that's going anywhere near. But the likes of Colwill, for example, I know he's had an injury with his shoulder, but 4.6, 4.5 seems to be kind of fairly favoured, even if Chilwell does kind of get himself fit, which we don't know when he's back. Again, could be a really good option. Robert Sanchez in goal. Again, could be if you have kind of the time to make the transfer, could be a player that you may be thinking of bringing in. Looking at the XGC, which is okay as his 5th, a player you could be looking at bringing in for Areola. And yes, I think Nkunku is a player that we're all going to be looking forward to the return of and seeing what he does. Down 7.3 now, obviously that huge reputation, expected back in the team after international break, so we'll have a couple of weeks to kind of size that up. But ludicrously talented from what I've seen on YouTube Reels, Football Manager, and it'll be fascinating to see kind of how that one goes. To be honest, I'm really excited for it. And finally, top Liverpool, Salah, key man, 2nd overall for non-pen XGI, 10.9, first 100 club member. This season thus far, top for Team XG rank, of course, and 4th for Team XGC. I don't know. Salah, I think that at the start of the season we all ignored him, then went on to not blank until game week 7. He really shouldn't have blanked, to be fair, because of that ruled out Luis Diaz goal. But just ludicrous GOAT level territory, and we've spent many hours on this podcast throughout the years, throughout the co-host speaking about Mo Salah. But Trent, not really in the picture. Shemikas obviously in the picture. But I think the main story is perhaps going to be about Nunez, Sam. Especially if he does play that kind of 14 to 16 run of Fulham, Sheffield United, and Palace. Like, wow, what a player! As long as you don't watch him, right?
Yeah, turn the TV off. But he is getting the data, he is getting the numbers, and he is actually getting the returns generally. It's just not when you expect them to come, and they're probably in little bursts, and the ones that you think he will hit the back of the net, they're skied over the bar, and then he'll bag one that looks almost impossible to score. So yeah, he is the definition of unpredictable. I love him, as I've mentioned on this podcast before. I really do want him in my side, but it's Ollie Watkins or him at the moment for me personally. And I don't know if I can do that to myself again after selling Ollie Watkins earlier this season. But yeah, that being said, he's very, very interesting for FPL. I think all of the different factors are there. We just need to see them all at once. We need to see him consistently getting 90 minutes, regardless of whether he's missing every chance he's given or not. And eventually it will all just come together to create one very, very effective FPL asset. For the time being, though, more than happy just with Mo Salah.
Shades of Drogba, I think, about Nunez and Suarez as well at Liverpool. I don't know if any of you listening have played that far back. First season for Drogba, very sort of iffy, hit and miss, and then suddenly kind of hit his stride. Same with Suarez. There was that period on the Ken Dalglish where he just kept hitting the post, hitting the bar, hitting the woodwork, and next year an absolute monster. No, we're in Nunez's second season, but I know all of the ingredients are there. It's just whether there's going to be sort of the egg added to bind it all together, or the vegan alternative. I can't remember what it is right now. But hey, there you go. It's chickpea water, isn't it? Yeah, there you go. No, really interesting stuff, I think, for Liverpool. And I think it's just so convenient that you've got Salah there, basically, to bring it all together and be that talisman for us. And it's just been incredible, really, to see. Maybe if you were a no Haaland sort of individual, it has been probably great to enjoy those Salah points from the captaincies, because it has been kind of astonishingly consistent recently, and Luton game aside, and long may that continue up to AFCON effectively, because owning him and Haaland's been great. It's just the kind of battling that EO, it's been a bit of a problem. Oh, well, there we go. All 20 teams, Sam, done. I think we've had something to say on all of them. Looking more into the fixtures to project forward and preview next time round. But yeah, a really interesting discussion and really interesting just kind of, I guess, take a stock check and do a kind of a state of the nation across all of those. And it's really fascinating, I think, striking that if you kind of FPL, kind of the whole sort of point of it is to boil it down into the key kind of individuals, isn't it? So yes, the team's doing well. This is what's going on. Liverpool, I've kind of had my head in my notes talk about Szoboszlai, for example, not FPI relevant, but a player that's kind of bringing it all together and kind of those sort of little kind of things beyond the XG rank as well. Why the XG rank's doing well, what's driving that is really cool. Shall we take a quick look at our teams before we finish here? I think we're going to leave the questions this week, just because we've gone on over an hour and a half already. But thank you to Dave CZ, FPL Crusader, Kitan, Fruki, and Jem. The questions that I got this morning before I had to go, and we'll answer all of your questions next week. Quick look at our teams here. I currently am minded to roll this week coming. I don't really see any kind of utility of a free transfer being good, frankly. I've got Cash and Son playing each other. I've got Shimikas on the bench. I've got Kabore at home against Crystal Palace on the pitch. But I mean, that's kind of, that's by and by. That's kind of what happens sometimes. I know FPL Review's telling me to play Cameron Archer and bench Anthony Gordon against Chelsea. I'm not sure about that one, really. We'll see what happens. If Wilson/Isaac is back, and then I probably will do that. I'll probably play Gordon. If they're not, then maybe I'll have a think about it a little bit more. And captaining Haaland for me. Rolling, see what happens during the international break effectively is kind of where I am. I've got White and Martinelli kind of flags, but I think they're sort of spurious flags as it is. What about you?
Yeah, similar. I'm also hoping to roll as it stands. I'm not particularly happy with my backline this coming week, but I don't think any of us really are. There aren't many fixtures that you back a clean sheet for. So yeah, Cash and Lascelles against Tottenham and Chelsea respectively, not ideal. Even Saliba at Brentford, I'm not over the moon about, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. And then, yeah, my front seven are very, very similar to yours. I've got Saka instead of Martinelli. So hopefully Saka gets some reduced minutes over the international break. But I doubt it somehow. He'll probably be used way too much and he'll get another injury again, knowing his luck. But yeah, as it stands right now, I'm more than happy having this team set up for game week 13. I don't think the average scores will be too high, considering all the matchups and quite tricky fixtures for very popular assets. And then having 2 free transfers in game week 14 could be really helpful. That being said, open to making a transfer if I need to, just not really seeing anything at the moment.
Me neither. I think maybe like cash for somebody, but
maybe
it's going to have to be an overwhelming reason to do that. And I don't really see it, especially because you've got I'll talk about this next week, but the kind of the 3 games in a week to come. It's good to go into that TV transfer, isn't it? And just swallow what could be a bit of a poor week. I mean, maybe one of those weeks where you've got some individuals going off with, some kind of player who's out of the meta, out of the template, going off. But I'm not, it is what it is. The only one might be that maybe there'll be a consideration for Bowen captain for both of us against Burnley. But I think Haaland versus Liverpool does feel like the one we go to. Cool. I think that's basically all we've got for you this week, and hopefully you enjoyed kind of a brief rundown, basically, of all the teams in the league and how they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll be back, obviously, this time next week. We'll still be in the midst of Game Week 13, but hopefully we'll be targeting the weeks ahead. We'll be taking a closer look at what's going on rather than a look back. Hopefully this pod has been really interesting to you and you've taken something from it. But for the time being, we hope you all do enjoy the international break, take a little bit of time off and come back recuperated next Monday for another episode of Who Got the Assist. Thank you all for listening. You can find us on X at WGTA_FPL or at FPL Pricey. And you can find us on Instagram or Threads at WGTA.FPL. Again, I'm just FPL Pricey on there. If you enjoyed the pod, if you could follow us on there or give us a 5-star rating on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening. And if you're watching on YouTube, then we'd really appreciate you to just hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content.
Cool. Thanks, Sam. We hope you enjoyed the pod. We hope we assisted you think about the opening third of the season. Enjoy the weekend off. We'll be back to preview Game Week 13 next week.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?